Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a retired firefighter begins building his dream workshop in the Colorado mountains, he expects peace, not war. But when the local HOA queenpin declares battle over aesthetic standards, one man stands his ground. Cedar beams, legal brawls, and a drone war. Welcome to HOA hell. There's a certain kind of peace that comes with retirement. For me, it wasn't the quiet mornings or the freedom from alarm clocks. It was the rhythm of building something with my hands. I'd spent 30 years running into burning buildings. Now I wanted to build something that would last. So, when I broke ground on the workshop/guest house I'd been dreaming about for years, it wasn't some impulse project. It was my legacy, a place where my wife Ellen could throw clay on her potter's wheel in the sun, and I could fix up the old bikes I'd been collecting since the Reagan administration. We live on 5 acres just west of a sleepy town in Colorado, nestled between evergreens and granite slopes. Our property's been in private hands for decades, and according to every deed and record I've got tucked in the fireproof box under my bed, it sits entirely outside the jurisdiction of any HOA. But as it turns out, jurisdiction is a tricky word when you've got a neighbor like Karen Wheeler. She moved into the house across the road about 2 years ago, a 3-bedroom stucco fortress that belongs to Silver Cliffs, a development full of identical beige boxes and identical beige people who have meetings about flagpole heights and mailbox styles. Karen wasn't just a member, she was the president, elected unanimously, as she liked to point out, which meant the other 7 beige people didn't want the job. It didn't take her long to start sniffing around once I started pouring the foundation. I was leveling the southern slope by hand, sweat in my eyes, radio humming classic rock, when I heard the dreaded sound, the slow, decisive crunch of orthopedic sandals on gravel. I looked up, and there she was, clipboard in hand, sunglasses that cost more than my table saw, and that eternal expression of practiced offense. "You planning to stain the exterior that color?" she asked without preamble, eyeing the cedar planks I had stacked beside the frame. "Sure am," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "Weather sealed, matches the main house." She sniffed. "That violates HOA code. All visible structures must be painted in pre-approved tones, sandstone beige, desert taupe, or morning mist." I chuckled. "Well, good thing I'm not in your HOA." She blinked as if I'd insulted her dog. "Silver Cliffs maintains aesthetic standards for the entire corridor. This street is a shared visual domain. I own my land outright," I said, leaning on the frame. "I've got the title and the permits. County zoning shows I'm not part of any association." "You're adjacent," she snapped, as if proximity was a legal doctrine. "That makes you a stakeholder in our community's integrity." I didn't bother responding. There's no debating theology with a preacher, and Karen treated the HOA charter like it was carved on stone tablets. She finally left, muttering something about setting a precedent and letters to the board. I figured that was the end of it. I dealt with enough blowhards in my years to know most threats die in the wind. I got back to work, set the posts, and by sunset, I had half the frame standing proud against the mountains. But the next morning, there was a typed note pinned to my front gate with a pushpin. The red kind you'd use on a bulletin board. It read, "All construction must be submitted to the HOA Architectural Committee prior to commencement. Failure to comply may result in citations or legal action." It wasn't signed, just a Silver Cliffs logo at the top and a list of guidelines that I was fairly certain she'd printed off her own computer. I stood there for a long minute, reading it over, amused and irritated in equal measure. It was nonsense, but it was persistent nonsense, and that's the kind that causes trouble. Ellen came out with a mug of coffee, glanced at the paper, and rolled her eyes. "She thinks she's the queen of the block," she muttered. "You going to call the county?" I nodded. "I want this in the record." That afternoon, I took my folder of permits to the county office and spoke with a zoning clerk named Phil. He confirmed exactly what I already knew. My parcel was zoned rural residential, exempt from any HOA authority, and had been since the 70s. No shared road access, no easements, no annex agreements. Clean as a whistle. "Looks like someone's trying to bluff you," Phil said, thumbing through the papers. "You're good to go." I left with a notarized copy of my zoning map, just in case. By the time I got home, I saw her again, Karen, standing across the road, arms folded, watching my workshop frame like it had personally insulted her. I didn't wave. I just went inside and poured myself a bourbon because something told me she wasn't done. A few days passed without incident, and I let myself believe, foolishly, that Karen had decided to busy herself elsewhere. Maybe she found someone's mailbox was 2 inches too tall or spotted a basketball hoop left out overnight. Whatever petty crusade it was, I hoped it took her attention off me. That illusion shattered when I opened my mailbox and found a crisp, glossy flyer folded neatly inside. At first glance, it looked like some real estate junk mail. Photos of happy families in beige homes, the Silver Cliffs logo in the corner, big friendly font that read, "Protect our community standards." Then I saw the subheading, Reminder, All. Adjacent properties are subject to architectural review. Unapproved projects may face legal consequences. Adjacent properties. They couldn't mean me, could they? I flipped it over. More jargon, more rules. Noise after 7 p.m. prohibited. Outbuildings must match primary home aesthetics. HOA reserves right to review projects impacting community value. It was all nonsense, and yet it looked official. Not legal, but persuasive. It didn't target me directly, but it might as well have. And if I hadn't known better, it might have scared me. I could only imagine how someone new to the area or less familiar with property law might fold under the pressure. Ellen found me at the kitchen table staring at the flyer like it was a summons. She read it, sighed, and put her hand on my shoulder. She's ramping up. No kidding, I muttered. This is pure intimidation. The next morning I saw her again. Karen marching across the road like she owned every damn tree and rock between our driveways. This time, she had a rolled-up poster tube under one arm and a smug tilt to her chin. "You're going to want to see this," she said, holding out a laminated map with color-coded zones and a big red line that, curiously, looped around my property. "I had our legal counsel revise the boundaries of Silver Cliffs," she declared. "Per Section 14B of the Charter, any adjacent parcels may be annexed for visual harmony." I took the map. Looked real pretty. Laminated, too. Someone had gone to Kinko's. I held it up against the sun and squinted at the faint watermark. "Karen, this isn't from the county," I said. "This isn't even from the planning department. Did you make this in PowerPoint?" She frowned, pulled the map back, and snapped the edges. "This is a proposed update. The board approved it unanimously." "Yeah? And did the board check with the county? Because Phil down at zoning says I'm not part of any HOA. Never have been. And if anyone's trying to change that, they'd need my signed consent. Which you don't have. So unless you plan to trespass with a land surveyor in a fantasy, I suggest you turn around." Her jaw twitched. "We'll see what the district says." I leaned against the porch post, arms folded. "You do that." She left in a huff, but I wasn't done. I grabbed my phone, snapped a picture of the fake map, and forwarded it to my lawyer, along with a short summary of what just happened. He replied less than an hour later. "This could easily qualify as an attempt to assert fraudulent authority. Keep documenting. If she keeps escalating, we go to the county prosecutor." That evening, I started locking the gate to the workshop area. Not out of fear, but because I was no longer sure Karen wouldn't start wandering onto the property with a camera crew and an enforcement vest. Just after dinner, I checked the trail cam I'd set up by the driveway. Motion alerts showed a figure standing near the edge of our boundary line for almost 10 minutes, doing nothing but pacing back and forth. The grainy footage was unmistakable. That bob haircut was practically a landmark. Ellen and I watched the clip twice, then 3 times. She turned to me and said, "She's losing it." "Or doubling down," I replied. "Either way, I'm going to the county office first thing tomorrow." And I did. Phil, bless him, was still there, sipping coffee from a mug that said, "Code Enforcement, we do it by the book." I handed him the flyer and a printed image of Karen's custom map. He squinted, then chuckled. "This is good," he said. "I mean, it's a terrible forgery, but it's good. I'm adding this to your file. She tries anything official with this, it'll backfire hard." I left with another certified copy of my zoning map, now with Phil's handwritten note in the margin. Property 100% non-HOA. No annexation rights. I kept it in a plastic sleeve, just in case Karen ever wanted a visual aid the next time she trespassed. I didn't know yet just how far she'd go to protect her little beige empire. But I was damn sure she hadn't hit her limit. The 3rd month of construction brought with it the roof framing and a deep sense of satisfaction. There's something about seeing the skeleton of a building start to take shape. It's like watching your own resolve become visible. Ellen had even started bringing out samples of clay tiles for the guest bathroom she wanted, spreading them out on a folding table like we were hosting some artisan design show. It was a good week, until it wasn't. I was up on the roof beams, hammering away with my tool belt jangling like a wind chime, when I heard the sound of tires crunching down the drive. Loud, deliberate, not the usual delivery truck. I squinted past the sun and saw not one, but two black and white patrol cars pulling up just outside the workshop fence. For a split second, I thought something serious had happened nearby, maybe a break-in or a call for help. But then I saw who stepped out of the first cruiser, and my heart did a strange flip between pride and dread. It was Nate, my son, junior patrol officer, newly minted from the academy. Still had that fresh-out-of-training look, but stood tall, clean-cut, badge shining like it had been polished with ceremony. He locked eyes with me and gave the smallest nod, the kind of greeting only a cop trying to stay professional in a weird situation could give. Then the second officer got out, a woman I didn't recognize. She had her hand on her belt, the kind of posture you use when you're waiting for someone to prove they aren't a threat. I climbed down slow, dusted myself off, and walked to meet them. "Afternoon," I said. "What's the problem?" The woman looked at her notepad. "Sir, we received a call about a possible illegal construction on this property. The caller stated there's an unidentified mail building on a vacant lot without owner consent." I raised an eyebrow. "Unidentified mail? I've lived here for 20 years. Nate stepped forward, kept his tone neutral. "We're just responding to a complaint. Can I see your ID, Dad?" I handed it over without a word. The woman looked from me to the license, then back to the workshop, confusion starting to settle on her face. "This your property?" she asked. "Every inch of it. Title's in my name. Would you like to see the zoning documents too?" Nate nodded toward the porch. "Might be best." I grabbed the file from the shelf inside, the one I'd started keeping close ever since Karen went into HOA overlord mode, and brought it back out. Nate flipped through it, already familiar with most of the pages. The woman took a bit longer, eyes narrowing as she scanned the zoning map, permit stamps, and that lovely hand-scribbled note from Phil at the county. "Everything looks legit," she said slowly. And right on cue, like a villain entering stage left, Karen appeared. She wasn't subtle, came marching down her own drive and stood at the edge of my property like she had a badge of her own. Phone raised, already filming. "I'm documenting this for the HOA," she called out. "This man is not allowed to build here. That structure is unapproved and visually disruptive." Nate turned toward her slowly, still holding the folder. "Ma'am," he said, "this property is not part of your HOA." She hesitated, just for a second. "That's debatable. The board has discussed jurisdictional integration." "No, ma'am, it's not debatable. The records show this parcel is independently owned and outside any association boundaries. You filed a false report." That was the moment the phone started to shake in her hand. I was concerned. I thought it was an abandoned lot. Nate raised his voice, calm but firm. "You filed a police report claiming an unidentified trespasser was committing a felony. That's a criminal misuse of emergency services." "I didn't say felony." "You said unauthorized construction. That's a code violation at most, and only if it were true, which it isn't." The other officer stepped in, arms crossed. "Ma'am, do you live in the residence across the street?" "Yes." "Then you're aware of who lives here." Well, I thought someone else had taken over. I heard sawing, and there were trucks." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Trucks? Karen, that's called construction. Welcome to rural Colorado." Nate gave me a look, the please don't provoke her look, but even he cracked the barest smile. The conversation ended with Karen retreating back to her fortress, still clutching her phone like a relic of power. Nate stayed behind while the other officer returned to the cruiser. "She really called you guys?" I asked. "She called dispatch and said a strange man was building a structure illegally. Gave your address. Didn't mention you by name." I exhaled. She knew exactly who I was. "I know. You had to take the call, though." "Policy," he said. But once I saw the address, I figured it'd be interesting." We stood there for a moment in silence, both watching the ridge in the distance, clouds rolling slow and harmless. Then Nate turned back to me. "File a report, Dad. Get this on the record. She's escalating." I nodded. "You going to write her up?" "Not me," he said. "But I'm logging it. False report. Misuse of emergency response. If she tries it again, it's criminal." I watched him leave, pride and frustration duking it out in my chest. My son had done everything right. professional, calm. But I could still feel the simmering anger in his voice. Karen had crossed a line. And this time, I had backup. The next day, the air felt different. Not just the spring breeze rolling down from the ridges, but the kind of electric tension that comes after something cracks but hasn't quite shattered yet. I didn't sleep well. Neither did Ellen. She spent half the night pacing around the living room with a cup of herbal tea, mumbling about that woman and whether we should put up motion lights along the fence. I told her not to worry, but the truth was, I was worried. Not about what Karen might do next. She was predictable, if nothing else, but about what it said about the neighborhood that no one had called her out yet. Either they were scared of her, or they were part of the cult. That morning, I filed the incident report with the county sheriff's office. A friendly clerk named Denise helped me fill out the forms, and when I told her who the complaint was against, she sighed like it wasn't her first time hearing the name. "Wheeler from Silver Cliffs?" she asked, typing with 2 fingers. "Yep. She sent in 12 HOA-related calls this year. Most get dismissed." "Figures." Denise smiled grimly. "You're not alone, Mr. Bailey." That gave me a strange kind of comfort. Later that afternoon, while I was unloading a shipment of reclaimed barnwood for the guest house siding, a white pickup pulled up along the edge of my property. The driver got out. Older guy, late 50s, tan jacket, clipboard in hand. "Afternoon," he said. "You Joel Bailey?" "I am." "You with the county?" He shook his head. "HOA code compliance, contracted consultant for Silver Cliffs." "Of course." "Well, I'm not in Silver Cliffs," I said, already annoyed, "and you're on my land." "Actually, I'm standing on the public right-of-way," he said with a smirk. "I was asked to perform a visual compliance review." I laughed, short and bitter. "Compliance with what? HOA bylaws don't apply here." Silver Cliffs requested documentation of any construction that may affect community visual standards. I held up my hand. "Save it. You're here at her request. I get it. But let me be clear. Any footage, photos, or documentation taken of my property without consent will be reported as harassment and trespass. Got it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Just doing my job." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You're doing her job, and she's abusing her position." He didn't argue, just climbed back in his truck and drove off. But the damage was done. I called my lawyer that evening and told him everything. His advice was simple. Document, document, document. Every flyer, every visit, every call. By the end of the week, Karen had escalated again. This time, she started leaving notes, printed slips tucked under a rock on my porch or taped to the gate, all of them unsigned but clearly from her. They read like citations but were nothing more than HOA scare tactics. Structure height exceeds community average. Correction required. Unapproved color scheme observed. Photo on file. Report submitted to HOA review board. Action pending. I started a folder, not a digital one, a real thick binder. Every note, every photo of the notes in place, every security cam still. Ellen even added tabs. She called it the Karen Chronicles. Then came the kicker. Late one evening, just after sunset, a pair of strangers showed up on the edge of our driveway. Young guys dressed like college interns, clipboards and badges hanging from lanyards. One waved and said, "Hi, we're here to discuss the potential annexation of your property into Silver Cliffs." I stepped out with my hands in my jacket pockets and asked what exactly gave them that idea. "Ms. Wheeler informed the board that the adjoining properties were being offered a chance to voluntarily join," one said. "We're gathering early consent forms." I stared at them, stunned. "Voluntarily? Did she tell you this land was already eligible?" The other one fumbled. "She said there was preliminary interest from your household." "Oh, really?" I said, smiling cold. "Well, you can tell Ms. Wheeler I said no." Loud and clear. "And if she sends anyone else onto this land without appointment, I'll consider it trespassing." They left in a hurry. That night, I emailed the HOA board directly. I found the contact emails buried on their own website and sent a blunt, formal letter stating that 1. I was not a member of Silver Cliffs. 2. My land could not be annexed without a legal petition and consent. 3. Karen Wheeler had already committed 1 count of false reporting. 4. Further contact would be pursued through civil channels. The next day, I got a single reply. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a clarification. It was a sentence. "This matter will be referred back to our president for internal handling." That's when I realized they weren't just allowing her to do this. They were afraid of her too. It was the third night in a row that I heard movement by the fence line. Subtle, skittering noises, not quite wildlife, not quite brave enough to be human. Ellen heard it too, paused her pottery mid-spin, and looked toward the back window. You think she's sending people? I think she's out of ideas and trying to invent new ones. I slipped on my jacket, grabbed the flashlight, and made my way down the gravel path to the edge of the west lot. The floodlight by the gate buzzed faintly as it powered on, catching a quick glimpse of something white by the fence. Another damn flyer. This one was laminated and zip-tied to the post, like it was supposed to be official. It read, Notice of Pending Review, Silver Cliffs Homeowners Association. Beneath it, in tiny font, Unauthorized construction visible from association-adjacent perimeter, subject to emergency review procedures. Cease and desist recommended. She was getting desperate. I tore it down and tossed it into the burn barrel by the workshop, but as the flames licked up, I saw something else tucked inside the mailbox, a folded manila envelope. Inside were printed screenshots from what looked like a drone camera. Aerial views of my workshop, zoomed in at odd angles, all time-stamped. I froze. Karen had escalated from foot traffic to air surveillance. The next morning, I drove straight to the sheriff's office with the drone photos in hand. Nate met me in the lobby, already suited up, sipping burnt station coffee from a styrofoam cup. She really used a drone, he asked, flipping through the photos. Yep, and judging by the angles, it wasn't flying over public roads. He nodded. I can run the FAA registration. See who's been logging flights over this grid. That was Nate, efficient and calm, even when it involved his father being harassed by a suburban despot with a chip on her shoulder. While he worked, I filed a formal complaint under FAA low-altitude surveillance violations and trespass. I didn't expect it to stick, but I wanted it on record. Later that day, I got a call from the zoning office. Joel, Phil said, voice low and annoyed. You got a minute? Sure. What's going on? I just had Karen Wheeler in here demanding an emergency hearing to redefine the boundary lines of Silver Cliffs. She brought one of those phony maps again. You're kidding. Wish I was. I denied it, obviously. She has zero jurisdiction. But the problem is, she's now claiming that your construction visibly encroaches on community aesthetic zones and that it's lowering property values. Phil, that's made-up gibberish. Agreed. But she filed a preliminary nuisance complaint with the county. That's when it got real. A nuisance complaint, even a baseless one, could trigger an administrative process. It wouldn't hold in court. I knew that. But it could delay my construction if someone in planning got cold feet. I thanked Phil, hung up, and drove straight to my lawyer's office. Bradley Torres was a no-nonsense civil litigation specialist who once got an entire HOA board dissolved for trying to ban vegetable gardens. He listened carefully, took notes, then gave me the kind of smile that lawyers only offer when someone's handed them a winning case on a silver platter. We file an injunction, he said. Block any HOA communication about your property. Cite abuse of process, and attach the drone evidence to prove pattern harassment. What about the flyers? Even better, that's impersonation of municipal authority. We can add that. By the end of the week, we had a motion ready and served. Karen received it on a Thursday morning. A uniformed deputy walked it right up to her beige stucco door while she was pruning her azaleas. She didn't even try to hide the meltdown. The neighbors said they heard her yelling through the front window for a full 10 minutes. That same evening, I was on the porch when Nate drove up in his cruiser. He stepped out, nodded at Ellen, then joined me by the railing. She's rattled, he said. Tried filing a counterclaim saying you threatened her with property-based intimidation. No such thing, by the way. I laughed. Property-based intimidation. What did I do? Build a scary shed? She also claimed that your siding was militaristic. Now I was just impressed. Is that a legal term? No. It's HOA, Karen, for I don't like you and I've run out of real arguments. I offered him a soda from the cooler. He declined but lingered for a few minutes, looking out at the workshop. She's not going to stop, he said finally. No, I agreed. But she's going to get stopped. The injunction was only the beginning. I didn't expect to end up in court over cedar siding and creative freedom. But here we were. Me, my lawyer Bradley, a visibly irritated judge, and Karen Wheeler in a beige pantsuit that matched her sour expression. The courtroom smelled like old paper and furniture polish. Karen sat stiffly at the petitioner's table with some young HOA attorney who looked like he regretted every career choice that led him there. A Across the aisle, Bradley looked calm, almost amused. Judge Cunningham wasn't a man of patience. A former military prosecutor turned circuit judge. He opened with, "Let's make this fast. I've read the motion. Mr. Bailey, you're not in the HOA, correct?" "Correct, Your Honor. You own the land in full, no shared easements, no contractual obligations to Silver Cliffs." "Yes, sir." He turned to Karen. "Then why are we here?" Karen straightened up. "Your Honor, Mr. Bailey's construction is disruptive to the community aesthetic. It's visible from several lots in Silver Cliffs. It creates visual chaos, decreases nearby property values." Judge Cunningham held up a hand. "Ms. Wheeler, your association has no legal authority over this man's land. You don't like how it looks. Tough. That's not a matter for this court." Karen's lawyer whispered something to her, probably suggesting she stop while she had breath. She didn't. But the community board authorized a campaign to voluntarily annex adjacent parcels. Mr. Bailey is deliberately sabotaging that process. He's posted inflammatory signage. Bradley cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we have photographs of the signage in question. None of them are inflammatory. One says private property or no trespassing. The other says this land is not governed by HOA nonsense." The judge snorted. Karen's face went red. Bradley continued. "Furthermore, the HOA president has distributed documents suggesting pending jurisdiction over Mr. Bailey's land, which is a misrepresentation. She's filmed him without consent, flown an unregistered drone over his home, and filed a knowingly false police report to which the responding officer was Mr. Bailey's son." That got the judge's full attention. "Is this true?" he asked, raising his eyebrows. Karen fumbled. "He's covering for family. That officer, he didn't even investigate properly." Judge Cunningham leaned forward. "So let me get this straight. You called emergency services claiming an unknown male was illegally building when it was Mr. Bailey, a man whose name, residence, and identity you knew. And when his son responded, you dismissed his professionalism because you didn't like the outcome." "I was concerned," Karen snapped. "Someone had to act." "Someone had to act legally, ma'am. You didn't." He turned back to Bradley. "Defense seeks injunction and damages." "Yes, Your Honor. In the amount of $50,000 for harassment, plus a binding court order requiring Silver Cliffs HOA to cease all contact with Mr. Bailey and issue written clarification to its members regarding HOA boundaries." "Granted," the judge said, slamming the gavel like he was putting down a rabid raccoon. "And Ms. Wheeler, you'll be personally fined for misuse of emergency services and violation of privacy statutes. One more stunt like this, and it won't be civil court next time." Karen tried to speak, but her lawyer tugged her sleeve and whispered something urgently. She sat down, seething. We left the courtroom to a small murmur from the peanut gallery, a few neighbors who'd shown up out of curiosity. One even gave me a thumbs up on the way out. Outside, Bradley handed me a copy of the ruling. "Frame it," he said. "Put it on the wall of your workshop." "I'm thinking bigger," I replied. "Billboard." That night, Ellen and I opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving since our 25th anniversary. We sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. For the first time in weeks, the air felt still again. Calm. Karen had finally been shut down, legally, formally, publicly. But something told me she wouldn't stay quiet for long. People like her don't quit. They regroup. I thought the court ruling would be the end of it. Silly me. I should have remembered who I was dealing with. 2 days after the verdict, the neighborhood group chat, the one I never participated in but still got emails from thanks to some old utility mailing list, exploded. Karen had sent out a mass communication to Silver Cliffs residents. She claimed that a dangerous precedent had been set, that I had weaponized the legal system to intimidate civic leadership, and, my favorite part, that the recent ruling does not reflect the values of our community. Bradley called it libelous. I called it hilarious, but it wasn't just noise. 2 residents, older retirees from Lot 12 and Lot 14, showed up on my property mid-morning looking nervous. They had a printout of Karen's email and asked me, as politely as they could, whether I really intended to sue individual homeowners for voicing concerns. I stared at them for a second. "You really think I'm out here suing neighbors over opinions?" They didn't answer. I invited them onto the porch, gave them coffee, and walked them through the injunction, the drone surveillance, the fake flyers, the emergency calls. By the time I finished, both of them looked about ready to march over to Karen's house with torches. She told us you were threatening annexation lawsuits, one of them said. She's projecting, I replied. Things got quieter after that, for about 36 hours. Then a county zoning inspector showed up unannounced, clipboard, hard hat. That walk that says, I know I'm about to annoy someone. Mr. Bailey, he asked. That's me. We received a request for follow-up inspection regarding potential violations of the International Residential Code, accessory structure limits, roofline height, setback clearance. He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. I asked, and who submitted the request? Anonymous tip. Of course. He did his walkthrough, measured everything, looked vaguely embarrassed. When he finished, he said, Nothing here violates code. Your permits are in order. Sorry about the inconvenience. I offered him a bottle of water and thanked him for being decent about it, but I could feel the pressure returning. Karen wasn't done. That evening, I got a visit I didn't expect. Nate showed up in his civilian clothes, jeans, jacket, that tired look he wore when the job started to weigh on him. Dad, he said, you're going to want to see this. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were printed copies of emails. Karen had sent them to city council members, the planning department, even a regional development advisory board. In them, she made a formal case for reclassifying my land as influential to community development planning, using buzzwords like urban transition, shared resource corridor, and aesthetic continuity zones. None of it meant anything. But if any bureaucrat bored enough took it seriously, it could trigger hearings or worse, lead to rezoning initiatives. She's trying to get the city involved, Nate said. She wants your land reclassified so she can file a new HOA overlay proposal, which she legally can't do without my consent. Exactly. But if she muddies the water enough, some people might not care about the legal side. Bradley was already on it the next morning. We filed another cease and desist, this time addressed not just to Karen, but to the Silver Cliffs HOA as an entity. Bradley also submitted an open records request to find out how many county offices had received formal correspondence from her. The answer? 12. 12 departments had received emails, letters, or physical packets pushing various versions of the same nonsense. That night, I added another tab to the Karen Chronicles binder. Ellen suggested I write a book. I'd call it Suburbia and Sabotage, she said with a grin. And I dedicate it to every poor bastard who ever tried to plant tomatoes too close to a fence. I was sitting on the workshop steps, polishing the tank of an old '69 Bonneville I'd been restoring when the call came in. Bradley's voice was calm, but I could tell he was trying not to sound smug. It's done, he said. The county issued a formal reprimand to Silver Cliffs HOA. Karen Wheeler is being removed as president effective immediately. I set down the rag. Removed, not resigned? Nope. She refused to step down, so the board held an emergency vote after reviewing our injunction violations. Apparently, they didn't like getting legal threats on behalf of her personal vendetta. I let out a slow breath. I'd expected some kind of dragging standoff, not a clean decapitation. And the sheriff? I asked. She's being charged. I blinked. What? Official charge. False report of an emergency, plus secondary counts of abuse of authority and filing fraudulent documents with intent to intimidate a private landowner. DA's pushing for a plea, but she's likely looking at 6 months minimum, possibly more. Damn. Thought you'd want to know before the news does. Sure enough, by the time I flipped on the local channel, they were already running the segment. Karen's face, pale, tight-lipped, filmed while leaving the courthouse, filled the screen. HOA president removed after harassment case local man's landmark victory against abuse of power. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Ellen walked in with a mug of coffee, caught a glimpse of the screen, and smirked. Well, she said, looks like the monster finally tripped over her own leash. By the following week, HOA Silver Cliffs was under administrative audit. The rest of the board issued an official letter to all residents clarifying that no land outside their original plat would ever be annexed without explicit, unanimous, and notarized consent from affected property owners. That letter was mailed to every house within a 5-mile radius, including mine. Nate stopped by the next evening. He brought beer and a framed certificate, an official commendation from the sheriff's department for exemplary conduct under conflict of interest. You gonna hang that up in the workshop? He asked, holding it out with a grin. Damn right I will, I said, but that wasn't the only thing going up. The next day, I carved the sign myself, took my time, sanded the edges, stained the wood. Bold black letters across a cedar plank, mounted right above the porch. No HOA trespassing. No phony rules. This land is protected by family and the law. People noticed. Drivers slowed down to read it. Neighbors nodded approvingly when they passed. One even dropped off a pie with a handwritten note. Thanks for standing up to her. I finally finished the workshop the way I wanted it. Ellen set up her pottery wheel inside. I built a proper tool wall. Nate parked his cruiser out front sometimes just for fun. Karen, she took a plea deal. Got 12 months probation, a $5,000 fine, mandatory civics education, and was barred from holding any position in a homeowners association again. Silver Cliffs, they held a new election. Chose some retired librarian named Joyce with a garden and a live and let live philosophy. Good woman, stays in her lane. And me, well, I still build things. Fix bikes, drink good coffee, sleep without looking over my shoulder for drones. And every time I walk past that sign, I smile, because this land, it's mine, and no damn HOA is ever touching it again.